I had been aboard the Unconquered for 11 months before she said anything to me. That is not a metaphor. The ship's systems were cold, the reactors down to their lowest permissible maintenance state. The corridors held at 4 degrees Celsius to slow the oxidation on the older posit joins. She had no voice then. Nothing aboard the Grave Fleet had a voice. They had been asleep for 847 years. Ships that old. Ships that had been put to rest before I was born, before my grandmother's grandmother was born, before the compact fell, and the long dispersal scattered what remained of Earth's deep Navy infrastructure across 17 depots and 1 classified anchorage. Ships like that do not simply hum awake, they wait. They are very good at waiting. I was not supposed to be awake either. Posting was a punishment, technically. 3rd Watch Maintenance Supervisor, Cold Hull Division, Asheville Corridor Anchorage. A designation that was exact twice in the compact surviving administrative ledgers and exactly nowhere in the current Fleet Auxiliaries chain of command. The posting existed because someone, at some point in the cascade of bureaucratic surrenders that had accompanied the long dispersal, had decided that the Grave Fleet could not simply be abandoned. It needed supervision, a warm body, a log entry every 30 days confirming that the 17 capital hulls were still present, still cold, still waiting. That body, past 11 months, had been mine. My crew, to number 2, a maintenance detail, most of them young, most of them selected for the posting the same way I had been. We had irritated someone with authority, and the Asheville corridor was the consequence. Petty Officer Vane ran our environmental systems and complained about the temperature constantly. Chief Technician Oru managed our reactor monitoring suite and never complained about anything, which was in its own way more unsettling. The rest sorted themselves into functions over the first few months. Hull inspection, supply rotation, communications upkeep, the small mechanical disciplines that keep a maintenance station from developing lethal problems. We had no expectation of being relevant. That was, the quiet understanding we all carried, and none of us stated. The Grave Fleet was old history. The compact that had built it was older history. The war it had been built to fight had ended before anyone alive could remember. And whatever odds it could warrant to the constructions of 17 sovereign-class dreadnoughts had not materialized, had been resolved by other means, or had simply been forgotten in the chaos of the dispersal. We were the caretakers of a memorial. Nothing more. Then, on the 261st day of my posting, the anchorage received a signal. I was asleep. Vane pulled me out of my bunk at 0213 station time. Her expression, the particular controlled blankness that people wear when they are trying not to communicate how alarmed they are. The signal was coming from deep in the corridor, from a direction our charts did not usefully resolve, because ours of that region were 847 years old, and the stellar positions had drifted enough to matter. It was not a voice transmission. It was not a coded burst. It was a pulse, regular and deliberate, in a frequency band that our communications suite flagged as officially deprecated, discontinued by order of the Compact High Fleet Authority, in the 3rd year of the long dispersal, a frequency that only the Grave Fleet's own command net was designed to receive. I stood in the communications bay for a long time, looking at the waveform on Oru's display. It pulsed every 43 seconds. Steady, patient, it had, Oru told me, been transmitting for at least 6 hours before our passive array caught it. Possibly longer, given the attenuation over distance. It be an echo, I asked. A bounce off some structure in the corridor. Oru looked at me with the expression he reserved for suggestions he considered insufficiently serious. No. Old buoy? Some piece of compact infrastructure we don't have mapped? The signal is directional. It is pointed at this anchorage. Specifically, I looked at the waveform again. I looked at the 17 dreadnoughts visible through the bay's small viewport, their hulls dark, their running lights cold, their reactor exhausts sealed and quiet. Wake the crew, I said. All of them. We had no protocol for this. Should be clearly understood. The maintenance posting came with a procedures manual that covered hull inspection schedules, reactor temperature thresholds, emergency communications formats, and the specific chain of contact to follow if we detected structural compromise in any of the 17 hulls. It did not cover the receipt of a directional pulse signal on the Compact High Fleet Authority's deprecated command frequency. I do not think whoever wrote the procedures manual had considered the possibility. Did what any officer with a signals anomaly and no applicable protocol should do. I sent a report up the chain, and I responded to the signal. The response format was in the manual, buried in an appendix so far back that I would not have found it without Oru, who had apparently read the entire document in his first week aboard and filed it in a part of his memory that retrieved information with disturbing precision. The format was a standard compact authentication pulse, our anchorage designation, our date stamp, our commander code. We broadcasted on the deprecated frequency and waited. The answer came in 11 minutes. It was not a pulse. It was a full handshake packet, encrypted in a compact cipher that our suite, after 40 seconds of audible effort, managed to partially resolve. What it resolved to was a priority designation I did not recognize and a single identifier, unconquered actual. I looked at the largest of the dreadnoughts through the viewport. The ship's name was stenciled on her prow in letters 3 meters tall. Even cold, even dark, you could read it from the anchorage. Unconquered. It's coming from her, Vane said very quietly. Yes, she's been cold for 847 years. Yes. Vane was quiet for a moment then. Commander, I want to note for the record that I find this extremely alarming. Noted. I ordered the crew to their maintenance stations, the closest thing we had to battle stations. And I suited up and crossed the gantry to the Concorde's primary access port. The port accepted my maintenance code. The inner seal cycled with a sound, like something enormous clearing its throat, and I stepped inside. She was cold, and she was dark, and she smelled of old metal and preserved atmosphere, and something faintly chemical that I did not have a name for. The corridor ahead of me was lit only by the bioluminescent marker strips that compact engineers had apparently installed as a last resort. Illumination system, pale green, dim, steady, still functioning after nearly 9 centuries because someone had designed them well. I followed them toward the bridge. The Unconquered's bridge was vast. 7 capital-class stations arranged in a horseshoe around a central command, dais, each station designed for a crew complement of 3. I was alone in it. The displays were dark, the consoles were cold. I stood in the center of the dais and felt, for the first time since my posting, the specific weight of what I was actually supervising. Then a display came on, one display, at the communications station, a single line of text. Compact standard. The script that had been the Fleet Authority's official written language. I could read, because it was close enough to my own that the differences were learnable, which I had learned because Oru had given me a grammar reference in my 2nd month aboard, and suggested with uncharacteristic directness that I might want to study it. The line read, Command authentication required, present credentials. I presented my maintenance credentials. System considered them for 4 seconds. Then it said, in text, credentials insufficient for command access. Provisional operational status granted pending Compact Fleet Authority confirmation. Note, Compact Fleet Authority communication circuits show no response. Provisional status extended indefinitely. Welcome aboard, Commander. Displays came on. Not all of them. The bridge was still mostly dark. But enough. Enough for me to see the sensor suite initializing. Enough for me to see the navigation array pulling in data. Enough for me to see at the top of the tactical display a contact report. 1,140 contacts. Inbound. Moving at a velocity I read 3 times before I believed it, because it was faster than anything in our Fleet Auxiliary's operational registry. They appeared to be folding space. I had heard of the Veilborn the way you hear of things at the edge of the informed world, secondhand, filtered through auxiliary fleet briefings that were themselves filtered through intelligence assessments that were themselves filtered through ports from the settled corridor systems that had made the mistake of being in the Veilborn's path. The picture that emerged from this filtration was impressionistic, and I had always suspected, deliberately understated by people who did not want to cause panic. The Veilborn folded space. That was their signature capability, and it was not metaphor. They moved by bending the intervening distance between 2 points, collapsing it, stepping through. Their vessels did not traverse space so much as delete the space between themselves and their destination. This made them faster than anything in the current Fleet Auxiliary's operational inventory, harder to track than anything our sensor nets were designed to handle, and effectively invisible to the scanning arrays that the corridor systems relied on for defense, because a scanner looks for something moving through space, and Veil-born vessels do not move through space. They simply are somewhere, and then they are somewhere else. It also made them extraordinarily confident. They had been confident for a very long time. 6,200 years, according to the intelligence assessments, since the first recorded contact with a civilization they had decided to erase. 6,200 years of folding their armadas into position and then watching the local sensor nets fail to track them, fail to acquire firing solutions, fail to mount anything resembling a coherent defense. 6,200 years of the corridor systems learning, one by one, that there was no point in building a navy, because you could not hit what you could not see, what the Veilborn did not know, what they could not have known, because it had not been in any archive they had ever folded into and taken apart, was why the Compact had built the Grave Fleet. The Sovereign-class dreadnoughts were not scanner ships. They were not velocity ships. They were not built on the same operational principles as the Fleet Auxiliary's modern inventory, because they had been built 847 years ago against a threat that the Compact had been preparing for since at least a century before that. A threat. That folded space, that bent perception, that scraped itself from sensor readouts, the way water runs off sealed composite. The Compact had studied the problem. The Compact had understood, eventually, that the solution was not a better scanner. The solution was a hull and a weapons platform that the fold could not affect. The Sovereign-class dreadnoughts were built from an alloy that the Compact's materials engineers had spent 60 years developing, and that did not appear in any archive I had ever accessed. A dense, cold, non-reactive composite whose quantum-level structure was, as best I can reconstruct from the Unconquered's own technical logs, specifically configured to resist spatial distortion at the local level. Fold did not work on them. More precisely, the fold could not recognize them as something that needed to be moved, because the alloy did not register in the perceptual framework that Veil-born fold navigation used to identify objects in space. To a Veil-born fold navigator, a Sovereign-class hull was background noise. It was not there. The Sovereign-class railgun platforms absolutely were there, and they could track anything that created a fold exit event. The spatial ripple that occurred when a Veil-born vessel arrived somewhere, which was the one moment in their transit that they were momentarily visible on every detection scale simultaneously. I read this in the Unconquered's technical logs while the ship came awake around me. She came awake slowly. 847 years of cold maintenance sleep does not reverse in minutes. The reactor sequence alone took 4 hours. The Unconquered system, running through 11 separate initialization protocols before the main drive cores achieved operational temperature. During those 4 hours, I sat at the command dais and watched the contact report on the tactical display, and watched the 140 Veil-born fold signatures moving toward the corridor. They were not moving toward my anchorage specifically. I want to be accurate about that. They were moving toward the corridor as a whole, in the systematic way that the intelligence assessments described as a fold erasure pattern, a methodical spatial advance in which Veil-born armadas fold into a region, eliminate whatever presence they find there, and then fold to the next region. They had been erasure patterning the outer corridor systems for the past 18 months. The Asheville corridor was, evidently, next. In the second hour of reactor initialization, the other 16 dreadnoughts began receiving the Unconquered's command net broadcast. I watched them come on, one by one on the tactical display. The unyielding first, then the threshold of night, then the long patience and the Cassara's compact and the Warden absolute, old names. Names Brinsits from Navy that had ceased to formally exist 8.5 centuries ago. Names chosen by people who had known they were building ships for a war that might not come in their lifetimes, and who had named them accordingly. The Iron Continuance, the Sealed Covenant, the Weight of Days, the Eightfold Reckoning. 7 more after that, until all 17 capital hulls showed green on my display, and the command net was whole. 12 maintenance personnel, and 17 capital dreadnoughts. I sat with that arithmetic for a long moment. Then I opened the command net. This is Commander Castle. Unconquered actual, provisional operational status, compact authentication pending. All fleet, I want station reports. Responses came in compact standard, automated, from the ships themselves, reactor status nominal, weapons systems initializing, sensor suites online, navigation arrays calibrated, hull integrity nominal across all 17 hulls. The cold storage had done its work. The Grave Fleet's own maintenance systems had kept them, faithfully, for 847 years. Fleet status, I said. 17 of 17 hulls operational. Systems at 63% readiness and rising. Estimated full readiness, 9 hours, 42 minutes. Recommend holding position. On the tactical display, the Veil-born fold signatures were decelerating toward the outer boundary of the corridor. They were staging, taking up a dispersal pattern that the intelligence assessments called a fold erasure formation, designed to saturate a region with simultaneous fold arrivals so that no defensive system could react to all of them at once. It was an excellent formation. Against any defensive system the corridor systems had ever deployed, it would have worked perfectly. I sent a message up the fleet auxiliary chain at the beginning of the 3rd hour. A clear, detailed report. The wake-up status of the Grave Fleet, the incoming Veil-born formation, my provisional command authority, and a request for clarification on rules of engagement. The message would take approximately 9 hours to reach the nearest auxiliary command node, and another 9 hours for any response to return. I acknowledged this mathematics, logged my acknowledgement, and made my command decision. We would not be holding position. The Veil-born Fold Armada made its first transit into the corridor at hour 6 of the Unconquered's wake-up sequence. 112 vessels, folding into a dispersal pattern across a 40,000-kilometer spread. Arriving simultaneously, the fold erasure opening move that the intelligence assessment said had never failed to paralyze a defensive response. The fold exit events lit up the Unconquered's tactical display like a string of signal fires, and the Grave Fleet was already there. Not in the sense of having arrived. The Grave Fleet had not moved yet. The reactor sequences were still completing. The weapons systems were at 81% readiness and climbing. I mean that the Grave Fleet's sensors had been tracking every fold exit event from the moment the Unconquered's suite came online, and the firing solutions had been queued, and when the first transit wave completed, and the 112 Veil-born vessels hung momentarily in real space at the end of their fold, a window of 4 to 7 seconds during which they were fully present. The Grave Fleet's long-range railgun platforms fired. The railgun platforms operated on a principle I will describe plainly. They fired dense kinetic projectiles at a fraction of light speed, in salvos calculated by fire control systems that the Compact's engineers had specifically designed to manage the fold exit targeting window. 4 seconds was enough. It had been designed to be enough. 91 of the 112 Veil-born vessels in the first transit wave were destroyed before the remaining 21 completed their refold sequence. 21 survived the first wave. They folded away. They reported what they had encountered. I imagine the Fold Armada's command structure received that report and experienced something it had not experienced in 6,200 years. The information that their formation had not worked, that something in the Asheville corridor had been waiting for them, had tracked the fold exits, had maintained firing solutions, and had destroyed 91 of their vessels in the 4-second window. I imagine they concluded it was a fixed installation, prepared defensive system, sophisticated but static, something they could route around, or overwhelm, or fold past. They sent the second wave at hour 8. 460 vessels, in a wider dispersal, the fold exits spread across a 200,000-kilometer front, too wide for any fixed installation to cover simultaneously. The Grave Fleet was no longer fixed. By hour 8, the reactor sequences were complete, and all 17 dreadnoughts were moving. Not fast. The Sovereign class was not a velocity ship, and 847 years of cold sleep had left some of the drive systems stiff in ways that the maintenance logs cataloged with mechanical precision. But they were moving, and they were distributed across the engagement volume in a formation the Compact's tactical doctrine called the spread net. 17 capital hulls, spaced to ensure overlapping fields of fire at every point in a region 300,000 kilometers across. The second wave folded in 460 fold exit events, spread across 200,000 kilometers. The Grave Fleet's fire control systems processed all 460 in parallel. I will not pretend I was calm during what followed. I was not calm. I was sitting at the command dais of a ship that had been asleep since before most civilization's recorded memory of it, to a fleet of 17 dreadnoughts that acknowledged my provisional authority through automated systems, because there was no one else managing a battle against an enemy that had never been stopped in 6 millennia through sheer determination not to be the person who failed to use what the Compact had left behind. My hands were steady because I needed them to be. That is the only accuracy I can offer. The second wave lost 308 vessels. The remaining 152 folded away. There was a pause then. 2 hours, 47 minutes on my log. I used the time to run the Grave Fleet's weapons readiness checks, to confirm the status of all 17 hulls, to send an updated report up the auxiliary chain, and to walk the unconquered corridors for 40 minutes, because sitting still was no longer something my body would permit. The ship was fully awake by then. The environmental systems had brought the temperature up to operational standard. Corridor lights were on, not the dim green bioluminescent strips, but the full overhead panels, warm and steady, the same light that Compact crews had worked under for the decades before the long dispersal. I walked past stations that were designed for crew I did not have, past the officers' quarters that had been cold and sealed for 847 years, past the galley and the medical bay and the secondary weapons control room, and I put my hand flat against the bulkhead and felt the faint vibration of the drive systems and the recycled air moving through the ship's lungs. She had waited 847 years for this, for exactly this. The maintenance detail found me in the corridor near the secondary command node. Oru walked with me back toward the bridge, without saying anything for the first 3 minutes, which was his version of checking on me. At some point he said quietly that the weapons readiness was at 97%, and that all 17 hulls were holding formation without I said that was good. He said he thought so too. Then we walked the rest of the way in silence, which was also his version of comfort, and I found it sufficient. I went back to the bridge. The third wave came at hour 11. All remaining Veil-born fold vessels, 822 ships, the full reserve of the fold armada, folding into the corridor simultaneously from 17 different approach vectors. A saturation attack. Every fold exit point covered, every angle addressed, the armada spread across a volume of space so vast that no fixed installation could have engaged more than a fraction of it. The Grave Fleet engaged all of it. I need to be precise about the numbers because the precision matters. The Grave Fleet destroyed 641 vessels in the third wave's initial fold exit window. The remaining 181 completed refold sequences and attempted a second transit. A desperate recalibration. Fold navigators pushing through damaged spacefold matrices, trying to find an angle the Grave Fleet's fire control could not cover. The fire control covered it. 123 vessels destroyed in the second transit exit window. 58 remaining. 58 fold vessels attempting emergency transit dispersal, breaking apart into individual escape patterns, each navigator picking a different exit coordinate, trying to make themselves too scattered to track simultaneously. The Grave Fleet tracked all 58 simultaneously. I had by this point lost count of the hours. My log tells me it was hour 14 from initial contact when the last fold exit signature resolved on the tactical display and the fire control. Systems reported no remaining targets in acquisition queue. The Veil-born fold armada of 1,140 vessels had come to erase the Ashvale corridor. None of them remained. The Grave Fleet held position for 6 hours after the last target resolution. Standard protocol, Uru told me. He had found it in the procedures manual, an appendix that apparently covered post-engagement clearance procedures, because the Compact's manual writers had been, in at least this respect, thorough. We ran sensor sweeps of the full engagement volume. We confirmed hull integrity on all 17 dreadnoughts. We cataloged the debris field. I will not pretend the number is not large. It is very large. We transmitted a full engagement report up the auxiliary chain. Vane brought me something warm to eat at some point during the 6-hour hold. She did not say anything. Neither did I. We sat at the communication station, and she ate half of whatever she had brought, and I ate the other half, and we looked at the tactical display and at the 17 green icons of the Grave Fleet, arranged in the spread net across 300,000 kilometers of what had been the Ashvale corridor and was now something that did not yet have a name. The auxiliary chain did not respond during the 6-hour hold. The round-trip time was too long. I sent an additional message at the end of the hold. This one addressed, not to the nearest command node, but to the Fleet Auxiliary's primary operation center. A message that detailed the engagement, the Grave Fleet's status, the destruction of the Valeborn Fold Armada, and a formal notification that the Grave Fleet was proceeding to active operational status under Provisional Command Authority, pending full Compact Fleet Authority authentication. The Compact Fleet Authority, of course, no longer existed. Had not existed for 847 years. The ship's automated systems understood this and had extended provisional status indefinitely. As the Unconquered had told me in the first minutes of her wake-up, I did not think the Fleet Auxiliary was going to sort out the authentication question quickly. I was not going to wait for them to sort it out. I opened the command net one more time. All Fleet, Commander Castle, Conquered Actual. Engagement is concluded. Fleet status is nominal. We are proceeding on course 274 Mark 15, deep corridor bearing. Fleet will maintain spread net formation. Speed, 1/4 drive. We will hold this heading until I receive orders to the contrary, or until we find something that requires our attention. 17 acknowledgements came back. Automated, precise, faithful. I set the Unconquered on course, and I let her move. I am writing this from the command dais, 3 hours into our heading, because the procedures manual specifies that a post-engagement commander's log be filed within 12 hours of the cessation of hostilities. The dais is warm, the displays are bright, the Grave Fleet is moving in formation around me, the unyielding and the threshold of night to port, the Long Patience and the Cassara's compact to starboard, the rest arrayed behind and ahead in the spread net configuration, the whole of it moving through the corridor at 1/4 drive speed. On the sensor display, corridor ahead is empty for as far as the Unconquered suite can resolve. It will not stay empty. I do not know what the Valeborn will do next. I do not know how many more Fold Armadas they have, whether the survivors, if any, reported what they encountered accurately, whether the intelligence assessment's estimate of their total Fold-capable fleet strength is still valid after what happened in the last 14 hours. I do not know how long it will take the Fleet Auxiliary to respond to my transmissions, whether they will confirm my authority, whether they will send orders or a relief commander or nothing at all. What I know is that the Grave Fleet is awake. What I know is that the Compact built these ships for exactly this purpose, and that the Valeborn's Fold perception, the system they have used to erase every civilization that stood in their path for 62 centuries, cannot see the Sovereign-class hull, cannot fold it, cannot scrub it from sensors, cannot make it disappear. The ships are simply here, in a way that does not yield to the Valeborn's category of tool. The Fold does not touch them, because the Fold does not know what to do with them. 6,200 years, the Valeborn have moved through the corridor systems. 6,200 years of Fold arrivals and sensor scrubbing, and the long, patient erasure of whatever they found. 6,200 years during which, in one cold anchorage in one forgotten stretch of space, 17 dreadnoughts waited in the dark, and were not found, because you cannot find what you are not capable of perceiving. 1,140 ships came to the Ashvale corridor. None of them returned. The Grave Fleet is moving deeper into the corridor, bearing 274 Mark 15, and I am the provisional commander of 17 Sovereign-class dreadnoughts, built 847 years ago for a war that is not over. Whatever is at the end of this heading, I think we are already tracking it.